Sweet. All right. So like the lesson that we're gonna do today is over like the Ukrainian history from World War II and how it compares to what's going on over there today. And so just like some introductory questions. Where do you guys like what's your idea of like where World War II was originally fought?
Um, like overseas, like over in like Europe, Russia area kind of.
Yes. So like I'm gonna have some definitions later, but like mainly in Germany, France, Poland, those areas, and then like you not like the main battles weren't obviously like in Ukraine, but Ukraine was definitely affected by World War II. And then do you guys know like what nations brought like made up the Allied forces? So technically like the Allied forces would be like what we would consider like the good guys, I guess. So if you guys have any idea of what those are, then you guys feel free to share and then we're gonna discuss it in a minute.
I know the United States was one of them, and then Britain, I think, was in there, and then I don't know. There was another one, but I can't. I haven't
Yeah.
done this in a while.
And so no, it's gonna be so like it's gonna be Great Britain, the United States, the Soviet Union, and China, and they have a little nickname for themselves that I'm gonna cover on the next slide. And then do you guys know kind of like what nations brought up like the Axis forces, so the side that everybody else was fighting against?
That
Oh.
was I
These would be so like Germany, it'd be Germany,
yeah.
Italy, and um Germany, Italy, and Japan are going to be those three countries that like were the main three countries that were fighting this. And then what's your guys' definition of a refugee?
Um, Somebody who like was affected by war and like had to either like flee their country or like needed to get away from their country type situation,
Yes,
I think.
exactly, exactly. And then that kind of carries over into my next question of like why a person becomes a refugee, which you already kind of covered that in that definition. So these are going to be our actual definitions that um just like have an idea in your head just when you're like so you can read through these and then I'll kind of assess them as we go through. But so like a refugee, just like how you said, is a person who was forced to leave their country so that they could escape like war, persecution, natural disasters, just anything like that. They were forced to leave. So then kind of how we discussed earlier too, the Allied forces were the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, the United States, and China. And these four countries are going to be known as the Big Four, just how like in history when people say that that's just who they think of. And then also how we said earlier, the Axis forces are going to be Germany, Italy, and Japan. So some background information on just like the unit in general is going to be Ukraine's borders are very commonly changed and challenged. This happens throughout World War II up until today because like it has to do with like Russia's invasion on Ukraine that happened in 2022. Ukraine's just always been a very common ground for people to fight for borders over just because of how like commonly control over the country has changed because at one point Germany had control over Ukraine in World War II, and then even before that Russia, the Soviet Union, had control over Ukraine even before the war and stuff like that. So um just their borders are very commonly changed, switched around. There's not like a solid border there. So then under the Soviets rule, Ukraine went from being like a very, very fertile land with especially in the grain industry to suffering from a man-made famine. And so a man-made famine is essentially nothing changed like with the soil or like the crop production. It was solely that the crops that they were producing weren't being able to be returned back to the people and they were being exported and all this they were just not being able like all the grain production all the different things were not able to come back to Ukraine and the people of Ukraine, so essentially the people of Ukraine were starving because the Soviet Union was just shipping out all of their products and crops. And so this led to the deaths of nearly 7 million Ukrainian citizens throughout this time period of this famine. And then when World War II came around, it massively displaced Ukrainians from all their homes, and it left around 2 million people stranded in Western Europe by the time the war ended. And then 200,000 of those people ended up in displaced person camps. So not nearly as like horrible as concentration camps, just like there are camps of people who didn't have homes, who had to flee their country, refugees. And then these people, a lot of them would later immigrate to the Americas and other countries. And so we're gonna watch a few videos of some survivors of these of Ukrainian refugees and their stories. So let me pull this, and then if I can. Okay, you'll have to let me know if you can't hear it.
My father was a priest in a village, and we had a wonderful children's life. We had a big garden, and we had fruit trees, and I was climbing all the way to the top. It was free of worries. Now, when the Russians came, it was a different story. As a young girl, I cannot forget it. In the morning when I went to school, I could see trucks loaded with people crying because they were sent to Siberia. So then after school, I used to go to a market and look for our villagers and ask them if my parents are still home or maybe they are sent to Siberia, and I was left orphaned. The front was only 6 kilometers, which is what, 4 miles away. We didn't have a car. And so my father loaded the wagon driven by horses. And you should see the road. The road was packed with people, children, and we were almost walking because our wagons were loaded with whatever parents could remember to put on. Even though we didn't have very much to eat, our life was so full. It was even better for me than in our country. We were sorry to leave our country, and here we had everything. Churches, schooling, even opera. It was organized, and they traveled from one camp to the other and performed opera.
Okay. So basically, like how I mentioned I mentioned previously before this video, is that like the people that lived in these camps, like it was not a horrible experience for them. Like how she said, they had churches, schools, opera. They were thriving in these camps, but it was just a lot of people who were in the same situation of displaced persons, but like no one was really suffering like how they were in the concentration camps. And in this next video, it'll kind of touch on that as well.
All of a sudden, we hear the shooting on both sides of the river. And on one side are the Ukrainian underground. On the other side, they're Russians, because they are withdrawing. My father says, let's run quickly under the bridge, and hide under the bridge. And we hear the bullets coming down. I was terrified. My father says, we probably will die, but it's okay because we're going to be together. I truly thought that was the end of my life. And then, would you believe, all of a sudden comes a German Jeep.
Many of these first immigrants, they were strictly an economic immigration. The immigration after World War II
they left for political reasons. And for them, there was no way to go back. Consequently, they brought all the cultural stuff with them. Naukovic Tovarystvo Shevchenko, Uvan. They formed their own professional organizations. And of course, they started Plast again. And the same thing was happening in cities across the United States.
We developed a family feeling for one another. And you know, I still have friends that are still alive from camp. And I see them, it's like seeing a brother or seeing a sister, and not somebody that I know, not an acquaintance, not a friend, but it's really a family type of relationship. I remember my father would say, I know him, I know him, I know him, I know him. Right? Someone in Detroit, someone in Chicago, someone in Toronto, someone in Philadelphia, DC. And, you know, how do you know these people? But the answer is very simple. For 4 years, they bunked together. They went out drinking together. They went on dates together. They were studying together. They were doing politics together. You suddenly have this entire network of friends, and, you know, after a number of years, you know, they all move around, but you still know them. And that's one of the reasons for the vitality of the diaspora in the 1950s, 60s. Because the vitality of the camps was essentially transferred to the vitality of the US. We come into New York Harbor and you see the Statue of Liberty. And you see the city all lit up. I had never seen that much life during the war. The cars are driving and so on, and we're standing there. And I'm saying to my father, I said, is this real? Or is this propaganda? Because we grew up with the propaganda, you know. Or is this propaganda to show us how great it is in America? My father says it's real.
Okay, so why, well, when you're thinking about these videos, like, what kinds of similarities can you guys see to what like is currently going on, or what you know from like the Ukrainian situation right now? Like, what are the similarities that you guys can see between what happened there and what's going on now?
I think it's kind of a similar situation. Like it's like a war-torn country. Like they're seeing fighting, they're seeing their like homes being destroyed, they're seeing people be targeted, and that kind of makes them want to get out of that situation.
Yes, exactly. So kind of like, from what do you guys know a whole lot about like what's going on over in Ukraine like currently and recently, or like, or I guess,
Not
what
too
do you
much.
know?
Yeah, I know a little bit, but like nothing like super in depth.
Yeah. So, which is totally like, it hasn't been a very recent topic, but so like currently Ukrainian citizens are fleeing their homes because Russian invasion and kind of what we discussed earlier. But then how, obviously, like, what's different about what's going on now versus what happened then? Like, obviously invasion and fleeing, they're having to flee the country, but in what ways, like, what are some of the differences of what's going on now? The main event's the same, but like, what are some of the things that are slightly different?
I mean, it's a different like time, so they like can see that this like they can like have a better understanding of what's like actually going on and where
Yes,
they're
correct.
like at in the war.
Yes, and obviously, like, the advancement of weapons is totally different than what it was back then. And then also just like the media coverage of what's going on, like, people all around the world know what's going on, whereas during World War II, like, not a lot of people knew what was going on over. They knew what like their governments would let them see, whereas now it's pretty much, all you have to do is click on a link and you can know exactly what's going on. Do you guys know why the Soviets occupied Ukraine in World War II?
I don't remember. I know I learned it.
So basically, the same reason they occupied it are trying to occupy now is they they want the land. It was a once under their control. They want the land back. It was once part of the Soviet Union, and it's essentially all about control of the land because it's also closer to Germany and Poland. It's closer to those rival countries and countries that they're competing with. And that's, like I said, that's the same reason that they're occupying Ukraine now, which I pointed out in this question. What are some things that other countries are doing for the Ukrainian refugees now, and like what are they doing for them like when World War II is going on? Like what are some of the things that they're doing for other countries are doing for the refugees?
I feel like it's like kind of, I don't know, it's hard to say. I think like housing, like finding places where they can like get like food and like just like basic need type of
Yeah.
things is all that really comes to my mind.
Yeah, they're doing the same things as they were back then. It's just different time periods. It's just happening all over again. And I know like people talk about how history repeats itself, and in this situation it genuinely is, just because it's the same exact situation for these Ukrainians as it was in World War II. They're having to flee their country for safety, and having to go to different places where they can find housing and just be able to be safe while their country is under attack. So this will be your assignment. I have a map on the next slide. You'll make a copy of this map, and just as like a study guide for the unit test, you're going to take these keywords and then label them on your map, and we would go over them in the next class period. So, all right, if I can figure out how to stop.